Hi, everybody. My name is Muriel. I am part of this new group, Abracadabra Sisters, with my sister Sharon.
Hello.
We are exploring the concept of language, words, and how important they are in the creativity of our reality. Abracadabra actually means in Aramaic, I create as I speak. So we're learning how to create as we speak and how to recognize how we speak may not be creating what we want. So that's what we're trying to do here. And today we have a wonderful guest. Pamela Miles is a Reiki master. She's my teacher, my Reiki master teacher, a wonderful healer, a great, wise person. I think there's some magic to be learned from Reiki and from how that informs life. So, Pamela, welcome.
Welcome, Pamela.
And would love to hear from you. We kind of always start with where did this start? How did you find your way to Reiki? And you've stuck with it for a long time.
Well, do you want the story that starts when I was three or the one that's
Absolutely, wherever it starts. When, yeah, Sharon and I have both told our like 5-year-old stories a few times here. Several of them have come up throughout different interviews. So, yes.
well, suffice it to say that I started practicing yoga and meditation as a child, not because anybody in my house did, not because anybody in my family did, but just out of my own interests. So, um, I was practicing meditation and yoga for almost 25 years and was teaching meditation when I came upon Reiki practice. And it was an interest of mine, but this was back when this was before the internet. And so the only place where I saw any information about Reiki was on telephone poles. And, I just couldn't. Wasn't going to call somebody's phone number from a telephone pole and say, teach me Reiki, so it took me a while. It was some years where I had interest, but I wasn't making a connection. And then when I was pregnant with my second child and wondering, how I was going to manage in those early days, weeks, months of having an infant and a 6-year-old when I could hardly go 24 hours without meditating. I just really enjoyed myself and my life a whole lot more when I had spiritual practice every day. And it's hard to meditate with an infant. So when a friend told me she'd just learned to practice Reiki and was thought I would like it, and could she come over and give me a session? I said, sure, and she placed her hands on my head, and I very quickly started having experiences that were very familiar to me, a sense of subtle movement, little zings and pings around different parts of my body, but more importantly, that I was drawn deeply within, that I fell very naturally into a profound meditative state. And I thought, well, that was easy, and easy was something I was looking for at that point. And not usually a value of mine, quick and easy isn't really the way I was doing things then. But right then, I thought, okay, I'll do this. And I called her teacher and I said, must have it. And so she gave me a private class. And she was right. I did really like it. And within a very short period of time, I shifted my professional work from being a professional healer, working one-on-one with people, teaching classes and such, but also teaching meditation, to basically practicing Reiki and bringing the understanding that I had, of what's now called integrative medicine, to my clients, but the focus really shifted very quickly to Reiki practice because it was so much quicker and easier than what I'd been doing. And because what I felt was that it awakened or enhanced a person's creativity so that they started creating their own healing from deep within themselves. And that made me more of a facilitator. It was as if my hands had the chord that was just the right sound for their systems to remember their innate wholeness and wellness. And then they started skipping their way back to whatever it was that they were needing at that time. So the whole idea of creativity, I mean, I love that we get to talk about this because I've often told Muriel she's probably the most creative person I've ever met in my life. And creativity and healing are hand in glove. You don't have one without the other. And Reiki practice is a very easy way for people to kind of flip that switch.
A delicious way as well.
Yeah.
I like the way you use that word, flip that switch, because I have limited experience with Reiki. Um, I had surgery a few years ago on my face, and there was some nerve endings that I could not feel. And for a long time, the side of my head felt like a block, and I was depressed. I couldn't feel connected to my face on that side after the surgery. And I didn't know. The doctor kept saying, "Oh, it'll come back. The feeling will come back over time." And it just was driving me crazy. And I have a dear friend who's also a Reiki practitioner. And so I went to see her, and it just blew my mind. Well, it was amazing because the session, it was like she flipped a switch, and all of a sudden, my face felt like part of I felt my face again. It felt like part of me again. It didn't feel like a block on the side of my head. So it was just an amazing thing. I did not expect to get that much out of it. I expected to have an incremental help, and it was like I walked out of there and it was like everything had flipped
Mhm.
and I was back to feeling like myself again. And I
Yeah.
just talked myself into going to see her again. I just realized.
Yeah, good, good.
Good,
That's great.
good. That's very good. And when you have an injury, an acute situation like you had, surgery is a form of benign injury. It's much more likely that you'll have a dramatic reversal the way you did, where even a single session can make a huge difference. And generally, we encourage people to do a series because you want to not only, have this kind of gentle surge forward into greater health, but you want to help your body stabilize in that place because otherwise, there's stress in life and what happens when we feel stress is that we don't even notice anymore how stressed we feel. And the next thing, we've lost conscious awareness of our creativity. We're still creating, but we're not creating conscious.
Consciously. Yeah. Yeah. I've been saying lately, my latest like sort of dictum is that I feel like the one thing, the most important thing we are responsible for in our lives is managing our state. And Reiki is a wonderful way to manage your state, don't you think? Yeah.
Muriel, I can't believe you said that because one of the things that I say the most often to my students is take care of your state, and your state takes care of everything else.
Yeah.
Or take care of your state because your state takes care of everything else. And
Yeah.
nowadays, people talk a lot about self-regulation and the nervous system balance and such. Back when I started doing this work in 1986, there was no language like that. And I had to ask doctors, and say, look, this is what I'm seeing. Does this mean blah, blah, blah? Does that mean that? And they were a little surprised when all I was doing was taking what they knew better than I did and applying it in a way that they hadn't thought of.
Mm.
Did
So
you create your own language?
no, because that doesn't help when you're already doing something that nobody understands.
But you have, I understand you have written about Reiki. You have books, right? So you had to find a way to explain it, um, so that it's easy to understand for your students, for the reader. So I imagine you had to find your own language to explain the process.
That seems very reasonable, Sharon. And Reiki practice is not explainable. So, and this is where a lot of Reiki practitioners lose it, because they have the experience and they know it's valid and they know it's real and they know it's helpful, but they can't quite figure out how to talk about it. So I am a natural born mystic, I would say, but I also am a real critical thinker. And that combination really helped because I was asked to bring Reiki practice into conventional medicine back in the 90s because of a program that I had at Gay Men's Health Crisis, in which I was teaching, back then it was all guys, how to practice Reiki on themselves and share Reiki practice informally with their friends, because this was before the pharmaceuticals that we have now, when it was really scary to be
Yeah.
diagnosed. And not only, were you frighteningly ill, but also you were losing friends like every month or so. So people were in a state of chronic bereavement, which is terrible for immunity, and they had this horrible disease. And the doctors in New York City, the infectious disease specialists, noticed that when their patients who were doing better than they would have expected started talking about what they were doing, they invariably mentioned Reiki and often my name. So having a crisis like AIDS in the early days, or like COVID, although fortunately COVID didn't last as long as AIDS has in that acute way, is very humbling to accomplished medical experts, who became doctors because they want to help people. And they don't, when there's a novel pathology, they don't have any evidence to base their treatment on. And what they do is called evidence-based medicine, meaning it's supported by research studies. But when you have an epidemic and you don't have any research on that microbe, what are you going to do? So they were very interested, and that's when I started to notice that, wow, this people are really doing very well with this. And I want to be clear, I don't know of anybody who reversed their AIDS diagnosis, but their T cells climbed, their well-being, their productivity, their sense of optimism, which was not a kind of fantasy of like, oh, I don't need anything, I've got Reiki practice, but rather that I can get through this and I can even grow with this. And all of that is very important to immunity, being optimistic, not foolish, but optimistic, and attending to your well-being and your creativity and your happiness. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
Just believing that you can get through something can make so much of a difference. And that's
Feeling better,
evidence-based. They
feeling a
have,
little better. Yeah.
yeah, They do have a lot of research on that, having the right, getting enough sleep, not being as stressed, having a more positive attitude. These are all things that are so important,
Yeah.
that towards healing, the healing process. So, and I'm sure that Reiki supports that immensely.
When I first took when I first learned from you, Pamela, about Reiki and got my Reiki practitioner's level, um, I was teaching at NYU and I went to my class and the model came to class for figure drawing and she walked in the door and she looked at me and she gave me this like really funny look. And I said, I think her name was Christine. I said, Christina, everything you all right? What's the matter? She said, what's different about you? I said, different about me? I don't know. I don't think there's anything different about me. I said, what's making you ask that? And she said, well, you have a blue corona around your hands. I said, oh, well, I just got a Reiki initiation, so maybe that's it. She said, yeah, that's probably it. So, and I never got to talk to her more about her psychic abilities, which she must have had because she could see it. So there's something that happens to us when we take that initiation, and it's magical. So thank you for that.
Well, it's my pleasure and really an honor to share this practice. And although belief and optimism and all the things we've been talking about are really important, for sure, they're important. The response to Reiki practice has aspects that are also very measurable. So when I was asked to start presenting to doctors, and I mean, seriously, my knees were knocking. I was so terrified. I knew I had to speak to them
In their language.
in their language and their values, their concerns.
Yeah.
And one concern that I had, as we were setting up the first in-hospital Reiki program back in the 90s, was that by then the epidemic had jumped from the gay community into the drug using community. And so we had men and women, and we had, in the early days in the gay community, these were guys who, for the most part, had been movers and shakers. They were on top of things, and then they got sick and they lost everything. But they did have an experience of being able to make something happen in the world before this. In the drug community, it wasn't the same. These were people who couldn't trust themselves to get it right. They'd made a lot of painful, harmful decisions in their lives. And some of them were had been incarcerated. And, for many of them, AIDS was just one of the challenges that they were facing. And so then I had the challenge of, as you were saying, Sharon, making it relevant to them. But I was concerned that since many of them were seeing psychiatrists, that they would go to their psychiatrist and say, who knows what, about what they were doing and experiencing. And that's not at all what happened. I stayed on top of the psychiatrist because I wanted them to know if they had any concern, they could come to me, that I wanted to know about it, that I didn't think, oh, Reiki, 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 is everything. And finally, they wrote me a letter and said that they saw no reason why patients, even with mental health diagnosis, would not benefit from Reiki practice because it is balancing to the whole system. It seems to start in the nervous system if we're looking at the physiology rather than the more subtle parts of our being. But, once you balance the nervous system, everything else can fall into a state of balance.
Maybe we could talk about the resonance or power of those words, because that's what we're talking about here in our, abracadabra world. Also, there's a hands-on element. There's a very personal connection that you have with the person who's receiving the Reiki. So, can you give us a bit of a bit of sense of what's going on there? I mean, I've had Reiki, so I know what it's like, but people listening to this might be thinking, well, how does this work? Do they like blow it at the person, or is it just, do you get it over the phone, or, is it
No,
written
we
on a
don't
piece
need
of
the
paper?
phone when we don't need the computer and we don't need to blow at people. We can practice on ourselves or someone else with light touch, or we can practice just off the body, if there's an open wound, or we can practice totally remotely.
And it's a hands-on practice.
The
As,
first degree is
yeah.
hands-on practice, yes. Second degree is remote, not hands-on. So I would say, and I think of that quote from Huffy's, the words we use become the house we live in.
Oh, there we go. We're going to save that for abracadabra. That's a new one in our like oeuvre. Yeah.
And since I've always been on, kind of shaky ground in terms of talking about Reiki practice, because you can't talk about the ineffable. I've been very mindful of what words can I use to create a house that people would feel comfortable in. And it was like, oh yeah, comfortable. This simple word. We as human beings live in a world of such uncertainty. Uncertainty is terrifying. I mean, if you're a human being, you have a certain shelf life, right? And you just don't know what it is. And what we've found out is that fear is not healthy.
Yeah.
You know, living in chronic fear, living in this state of high alert, it's not healthy. The fight or flight response. So when we practice Reiki on ourselves or receive a treatment from someone else through an as yet unknown mechanism, how's that for language, Sharon?
Yeah.
Mhm.
um, the receiver system responds as if it's been reminded of its own capacity to self-heal. It's kind of like a background foreground shift, like the MC Escher etchings,
Mhm.
you know? And so when we're stressed, we're always, the glass is half empty and we're always worried. And when we're not stressed, not only is the glass half full, but there's water there. We're not just measuring it, we're experiencing the nurturance. So again, to go back to what Muriel mentioned before, take care of your state, and your state takes care of everything. Your state determines what you perceive, and this is 100% neuroscience. There's nothing mystical about that. That's the way our bodies function. So when we can improve our state through light touch to ourselves, even if you're sitting on the subway, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be in a lovely area like I'm sure, Sharon, you experienced when you went for your session. It can be anywhere. And the more
Yeah.
stressed you are, the more ill you are, the more apparent the response is, which is the opposite of what happens with conventional medicine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question because with my experience, my most recent experience with Reiki, um, I felt an energy. I felt like almost like an energy washing. Like I could feel my friends' hands, even though they weren't touching me. almost I could feel the energy jumping from her hands to me through that little space, wherever it was, you know. Um, but I'm curious to know what it feels like to the practitioner. Does the energy come from them, or does it flow through them? And does it have an effect on them? Do they feel depleted afterwards? Do you need to like re, re, regenerate after you've done a Reiki session?
And I want to highlight the word you used since we're talking about words and what we create with those words. You use the word energy.
Mm,
So when people use the word energy, they kind of split the room, right? Because the people who know what you're talking about and are comfortable with it, they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And the other people who are like, oh, get me out of here. And my goal has always been to create that house that everybody could live in, unless they don't want to, and not use words that will split the room like that.
mm.
So rather than letting you leave our conversation believing or misunderstanding, if I may be so bold, that it's energy, consider that what you're experiencing and labeling energy is actually a sensation. You had the sensation, and it's your experience. I have nothing to say about that, other than I know people who don't have any sensation and they still feel better when they get off the table. So, we can just leave that there if you want. But in terms of the depletion and all of that, I practice Reiki on myself every day. And I do that before I get out of bed. I start practicing before I open my eyes. And I speak of Reiki practice rather than Reiki energy, because when I first experienced Reiki practice from my friend, the sensations I felt were not new to me, Sharon. I had experienced them in meditation, when I was chanting, when I was receiving acupuncture, when I was receiving some kind of naive, let's say, unschooled healing treatment. So I knew this was me that I was feeling. This was my system reorganizing itself in the direction of more profound balance. I never bought into what Westerners have packaged Reiki to be, and it's from a mistranslation that Reiki is an energy that's separate from us, that has to come in and come through and be channeled and such. And I never could swallow that, because
So
that's
that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense because I mean, my imagination of what was going on, because I genuinely felt, and it's funny because I meditate too, and I had the experience so it was a familiar feeling to me that I get when I meditate, when like a certain, a chakra opens up. It was like that warm flow. I felt it. So I hadn't really thought about it at the time, but it makes perfect sense because that was something that comes from me. But I kind of imagined it was something that the Reiki practitioner was giving to me, but just reminding me or helping me to find it in myself. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. And do you feel, as a practitioner, do you know when you've hit pay dirt? I mean, do you feel it like when?
so. There's no pay dirt to hit.
I knew you were going to say something like that. I was
You know,
waiting for it. But
it,
you
it,
know what I meant.
but
I mean, do you know when, do you see it in the person, do you see like a shift in them when that happens to them? That's all I'm asking.
Well, I was an intuitive before I was a Reiki professional, so that's always been part of my interaction with clients. Um, Not to give readings as much as to let my intuition guide my interaction. And so it helps me ask them a question that can help them notice what happened. Because of course, I mean, I notice more than the person who's got their eyes closed, either at home in their bed or on my table, because this is what I do. But I also don't feel the need to label it because the words we speak become the house we live in. And I want to open the space. I want to help people be comfortable being in that space before the words. So I'm in that way, I know I'm a little bit of an annoying interview.
No, not at
No,
all.
no,
You're not
no.
at all. You're not
This
at
is
all.
a
No, there's a
whole
lot of,
new way of looking at things for us because I mean the whole point of what we're doing is putting creative, bringing a voice to creativity, and showing it in its many forms. That's the whole point of what we're doing here. And this is a very creative thing that you're doing. Um,
but very subtle in its creativity.
yes, yes, exactly. So, and,
I think there's
and
a
how
part.
do you write a book about that sort of thing? I mean, I know you
I
have
can
a
lend
book.
you the book so you can read it, Sharon, and
Oh,
then
I
you can
have
see.
to.
Let
Now,
her buy her own, please.
Oh, of course. Sharon, buy the book.
just send me the Amazon link.
Everybody, buy the book. We'll put the link at
So
the end. So,
it's such a great point because, yes, I see not everything, but I see a lot. But it doesn't matter what I see. What matters is what my client puts together, what they notice. So, for example, one time I was asked for a session by a woman that I knew socially. Our kids played together. I liked her very much, very smart, witty woman. She was a lawyer, and I was really surprised when she wanted a Reiki session. I just wouldn't have thought that. So she came and I gave her a treatment. And afterwards, I asked her, as I always do, how do you feel? And she said, oh, nothing happened. And I said, okay, how do you feel? And she said, oh, I'm so relaxed.
yeah,
You see, so
Right.
yeah,
the navigating that outward facing mind that wants to say, oh, the energy's out there and I need this and that and the other thing to bring it into me, instead of just being still, feeling safe enough, feeling your wholeness, feeling your timelessness, feeling your divinity, if that's a word that's comfortable for you, so that you can just be, even for a split second, and everything changes. When we feel safe, our nervous system works differently.
yeah. It resets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we
You
start.
know, and also, I mean, from my experience in meditation, and when I first started meditating, I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't even know I was meditating. Um, and I had some wild experiences because I didn't, and I was talking to Muriel about it. She's like, "Oh my God, that happened to you." And she's like, I can't believe that happened to you so early on. And, you know, and then once I started to have these experiences, I started to look for them and they didn't happen anymore because I was like, I couldn't relax. I was always waiting for the payoff,
For the
waiting.
show.
So, the relaxing part is so important.
I think there's a part of it which is critical, which is we reconnect to the breath. And they say it's said in the ancient texts, I guess Indian texts, that we only have so many breaths in our life. So if we keep our breath deep and long and slow, we're going to live a longer and happier life. And that's for me is one discovery with Reiki is that it naturally just drops you into an automatic um, different breath pattern, which is healthier. And that's and it's documented that the breath and the state of mind are tied together. If you're breathing fast and panicky, that's what happens. You'll be in a panic. Remember, Mummy was always like,
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
terrible. I'm having a terrible time, Earl. I don't know what's happening. The world is falling apart. And I say, take a breath,
She would get
slow,
herself all twisted
slow
up.
down. Yeah, take
Yeah.
a breath. And
And not only does Reiki practice improve your breath in the moment, but also if you practice regularly, and all you need is the first degree training, you need a comprehensive first degree training. That can be enough for most people. But if you practice on yourself every day, you'll find that the threshold for your breath getting agitated changes. I was reading maybe a year ago, one Sunday morning, I was reading an article in the New York Times about the breath. And, I was feeling a little snippy, like, oh, I wonder if they have anything worthwhile to say.
yeah.
And they had a timer. So I thought, oh, I'll time my breath. I was breathing twice a minute.
Mm,
I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I kept reading and I thought, no, I must have made a mistake. So I went back and I did it again. And I was breathing twice a minute. And then I've noticed when I'm leading like a group Reiki practice and I use a timer, which I don't use when I'm working alone. But it gives me an opportunity to time my breath when I'm practicing Reiki twice a minute. It also uh, interested me to discover that my heart rate, my resting heart rate, is just above that of an elite athlete. Now, I am not an athlete at
yeah.
all. I'm not even a yoga athlete. I practice, but
Yeah.
it's not an athletic practice. So the response to the practice,
Yeah.
it's so subtle and so profound. And if I can create a way in for a person to notice what's happening and then to feel comfortable with that, it can be a real life changer because
It's a major shift. Yeah. When I go to the doctor for a checkup and they put the thing on, they puff it up, check your blood pressure and everything. They check it once and they like, I don't think this is right. Then they check it again. And then they say, are you a runner? And I say,
right.
no, do meditate. They say, oh, well, that must be it then, because it's very slow, low and slow. And, it's like it's in the good place. It's not high blood pressure or, crazy or anything like that. So this is definitely a practice that makes your body more healthy and more just happier. I think the body needs to be happy.
And that heartbeat and the blood pressure, this is before the words. It's the same principle. This is what creates a healthy body that makes it easier to be happy. And even if people have genetic health problems, you can still be healthier
Yeah.
if you have a practice like this that supports you being rooted in your wholeness, your wellness, your timelessness.
Yes. Timelessness. I love that. Yeah.
So do you have a website?
I do. And it is reikiinmedicine.org, or you can just Google Pamela Miles Reiki. There's one thing that I do that everyone is welcome to. It's a community project. The first Tuesday of every month, I lead a free online self-practice. I started doing this on March 10th. of 2020, the day before or the day that WHO declared the pandemic, because I'd just come back from traveling abroad and I could see what was about to hit New York. And I knew that people were going to be terrified and that they were going to be isolated. And those two things are really hard on your immune system. So I wanted to find a way to give people a sense of community and support and engage them in self-practice so they wouldn't feel like they were so helpless. For the first 3 years, I hosted these twice a week. But within the first few months, we had over 25,000 people register
Oh, wonderful.
from more than,
Amazing.
I think it was 95 countries. It really was amazing. And guess what? They weren't all Reiki practitioners. I'd been thinking of the global Reiki community, but I quickly discovered that people were just coming to practice, to be in community. And so I want people to understand that, yes, it is wonderful to have the training and you have to do your homework. You have to check it, check the qualifications, because there are no standards in the Reiki community, and people have very different understandings of what it means. So you want to find a Reiki professional who is a good fit for you.
And I think it also has to do with how do you feel? Like if you go to somebody and you feel a little uncomfortable with them for some whatever reason, don't just go somewhere else. Find another
I
person.
agree with you. It's much
Yeah.
too intimate, even though you're fully clothed and everything. And even if it's remote, anything spiritual is intimate.
Yeah.
But what I saw very clearly was that even people who didn't have the benefit of the training, who were going through the protocol that I share, were feeling benefit, because we know that light, appropriate human touch is healing. I mean, there's a lot of research that supports that, as if we needed research to tell us that, right?
Yeah.
And you're still doing these sessions now?
I still do, but now I offer them once a month, the first
Mhm.
Tuesday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And everybody is welcome. And I just want people to be clear, this is not a Reiki training. It will give you a sense of what is available to you through Reiki practice. And
And how do they access this? Is it through your website or is it on a streaming platform?
if you go to my website, on the home page on the upper left corner, there is a link.
Okay.
I'm going to
All
put
right.
everything in the notes underneath the interview so
I
people
can
can find
We'll
that.
we'll we'll make sure that there's links to everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's a good way for people to get a little idea of what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Me too, actually. I'm kind of unfortunately I'm working at that time, usually on a Tuesday, but
So I record it. And if you register and you don't show up, then you get an email about an hour later with the replay link.
oh,
So
And
okay.
yeah, and everybody should know that these kind of practices are outside time. So it's relevant whenever. It's not
yes,
like you missed it. It was 4 o'clock, 6 hours ago. It's still relevant at, 10 o'clock at night if that's when you get there.
there is a sense of community. People tell me even when they practice with the replay, remember this is a spiritual practice, and spirituality is where we transcend the limitations of time and space. When that's a spiritual practice is how we become aware of our timelessness and eventually learn to live from that.
Yes, because that's what we are in
Yeah.
our essential self.
We're
Our
timelessness incarnate, and sometimes our humans are having a tough day.
Yeah. Is there something else we haven't asked you that you think might be super relevant or important for people to know?
Yes, about safety. And you kind of hinted to that a bit, Muriel, but I want to take it a little further because sometimes people ask, well, my father has a pacemaker. Is it okay if I practice Reiki on him? And this is where the misunderstanding of a separate Reiki energy can really mess things up because people think, oh, this is, and I've heard people say this, oh no, this is too high a frequency
Mm.
and it will mess up the pacemaker. Please, Reiki practice. I mean, I've got electricity right next to me. I'm on a computer, I'm touching it, and it's not short circuiting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Reiki is a spiritual practice, and our response to it is a balancing self-healing response. So my body is going to respond that way whether I am healthy and hope to stay that way, or I have just had surgery and I want to recover. And so many surgeons have told me they've seen patients recover 3 times faster than the usual when they've had
Yeah.
Reiki treatment, or whether there's a pacemaker or a limb has been amputated. None of those details are relevant to the benefit that Reiki practice can bring.
And in an emergency situation, I was on set one day, and the makeup one of the girls in the hair department got the hot curler thing fell over, and all the boiling water fell all over her foot. So we ended up having to take her to the hospital, and I took her to the hospital. I went with them, left my job to go with her because was giving her Reiki on her head and around her, just around her head and her neck and everything, not on the foot. And she was sitting there with this scalded foot, and she said, "Muriel, my foot feels nice and cool now. How is it feeling cool?" I said, "Good. It's working. The Reiki is working." So it's useful in emergencies.
It is absolutely because in an emergency, your body goes into intense sympathetic overdrive, that fight or flight response. It's sending the militia, so to speak, to where the problem is, but the body overreacts. And so when you have Reiki practice, you generally, what I've seen, and I don't know of any research to support this, but I've seen it again and again, is much less swelling. Just the amount of swelling that is needed to help heal. And so when there's less swelling, there's less to recover from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's nothing about Reiki practice that can interfere with any needed medical intervention or pharmaceuticals. I mean, I've actually practiced Reiki in the operating room with Mehmet Oz and other surgeons. And if there were any medical contraindication, believe me, I would not have been allowed there. And I wasn't allowed, I was actually invited.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So creating health, that's the house we want to live in.
Creating health. Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Pamela. Thank you so much for coming on our show. We really appreciate you sharing Reiki with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. I
Yes.
always love to help people know about how Reiki practice can support them, especially in areas where it can be hard to get the support you need, subtle things or pain or anxiety.
Let me ask you one last question here. I mean, for me, I took the Reiki practitioner level, but I've, practiced a little bit. I give a friend a little help here or there, or when there's an emergency, I'm there. But to me, my Reiki practice, I think, is in the art. Do you have a sense of how it spills into other parts of our lives? Is that something that you are aware of, that other people might feel or experience?
I think that you might be saying that you have that experience that maybe you have had at times during a Reiki session, self-practice, or received from someone else when you're making art. And that makes complete sense to me because it is that creative state, that parasympathetic state. Oh.
Yeah.
And I do, because I'm a Reiki master teacher, want to draw attention to understanding Reiki as a spiritual practice.
Yes.
You know, so we practice Reiki and we make art. And I think for, especially if writers hit writer's block, or, whatever art you're doing, whatever self-expression you have, it's like not going well. You're out of alignment with yourself. You practice self-Reiki and you don't have to clean out that chakra or move that this there and the other way. You just practice and your body, your system says, oh, right. Oh, okay. Oh, now I remember. And it starts reorganizing itself because our systems know more about self-healing than even the most astute and sometimes necessary medical professional, right? Because we're individuals and we're constantly changing.
Yeah, and I think that part of the huge problem that we have with the world right now is that people just don't have the sense of how powerful they are, of how um, insular and protected and whole they are within their own beingness, and at the same time connected to trees and other people, the animals, and the house that we live in, and connected to that. And so people are in living in sort of a desperate state, and yet Reiki is one practice that can just bring you back to yourself so that you recognize that you don't have to be like about that, whatever it is, all the time.
The key is to feel safe because just as you said, people are frightened. They feel helpless. They don't know what to do, and another thing that I badger my students with is the way out is in.
Yes.
The way out is in. Just
Yeah.
practice, and it doesn't have to be a full practice. Just as you were saying, you did, place your hands, close your eyes if you're somewhere that it's safe to do that, and give yourself a minute. And
Yeah.
it can be astounding how quickly your system starts to respond.
Thank you everyone for watching. We're Abracadabra Sisters,
And this has been Pamela Miles.
and we want you to like, subscribe, hype. You know what to do. We don't know what to do, but you know what to do. So thank you, everybody.